بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we begin with, we do a few lines today, inshallah ta'ala. Chapter 2, line number 20, line number 22. قال الناظم رحمه الله تعالى وانفعنا بعلومه واخشى الدسائس من جوع ومن شبع فرب مخمصة شر من التخم. Beware of the snares, or beware the snares of hunger and satiety, for an empty stomach may be worse than overeating. Now, earlier in the previous lines, Al-Busiri rahmullah ta'ala talks about how, or connects the idea of spirituality to food. For instance, when the line before come حسنت لذة للمرء قاتلة, which is one of them. So there's reference to food in a few different lines prior. Now, in this particular one, he touches on the idea of overeating and even undereating, actually. Both of them. He says, beware the snares of hunger and satiety. So he covers both of them, the idea that it's madhmoom, or it's not good to be in a state of complete hunger or starvation, nor is it good to fill your stomach. So this is a common problem now for all of us, to some degree. Everybody at some point, we all suffer the problem of overeating or addiction to food, and it's probably the biggest in the Western world. The biggest problem they're facing now is obesity and illnesses related to eating. So I want to kind of give an overview of some of the riwayat, also the ideas of why food has such an influence on the nafs, because the whole chapter is about the nafs. I mentioned last week as well that Imam al-Ghazali, for instance, has a book on this in his Ihya. The Sufis, remember, and by the Sufis I mean the people who, as their primary objective that they held, was the training of the nafs, or kind of controlling the lower nafs and moving up the ranks of the nafs until they got to nafs mardiya or radiya or mutma'inna. And they worked out that one of the central problems, or they worked out that the lower nafs almost feeds off one's overeating. That's one, the lower nafs. And we're going to look at the difference between the lower nafs and the devil. And also that the shaitan, the devil, his work is made easier by a person who overeats or a person who is addicted to eating. So what they did was, these people, these sages and saints and spiritual masters, they took all of their lives, they concentrated on that particular area as one of the, you could say, the top 2 or 3 kind of priorities that they had. And they anchored it in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and then they built on that. You had extremes of that as well. For instance, Imam al-Qurtubi, the famous scholar from Spain, great mufassir of Quran, say some people took these kinds of ideas too far, where he talks about medicine, and he talks about how those people who say that medicine is impermissible to use because or anybody who uses medicine has weak iman, he really severely criticizes those people, saying this is ignorance, and Allah puts medicines and these types of things. So Allah Jalla wa Ala's allowing those things to heal, and it's not lack of tawakkul that one takes medicine. So similarly, somewhere to the extremes of fasting kind of consistently or perpetually, where they wouldn't even break the fast. We're talking about dry fasting for 10 days, 15 days, 20 days, whatever it may be, kind of waiting for spiritual openings. Hunger was a principle that was used by spiritual masters always, but not to a level of starvation or death. It seems to me what's clear is that the stories that you hear of some of the sages and saints that took to hunger and then almost gave up eating, but that was for a different reason. Um, and I'll give one example of that. If you take the great sage Abul Abbas, Sheikh Ahmed bin Mustafa al-Allawi, he, during the early part of his life, on spiritual path, he was very, very involved in his, reading of Quran and his awrad and things like that. But then towards the end of his life, he seemed to, it seems, because he dies at the age of 63, which is relatively young. And the reasons for his death are also kind of mysterious as well. Meaning he was unwell, but the exact reason is unknown, maybe. There are some ideas, but he now, in the last few years of his life, it seems he moves completely away from food, where it is said that he would drink a little bit of milk a day and have some dates and a few other little things, but other than that, he wouldn't eat. Now, it's understood that what happened to him, on the other hand, which is seemingly happens to some of these people, you find in kind of the books of history, is that he lost complete interest in eating food for spiritual reasons, which has an element of danger to it as well, of course, because somebody can die by that, due to that. And he seems to have just been, because if you read especially his last 12 months of his life, he's completely engrossed in dhikr. He very rarely sees people. And when people come in, he sometimes snaps out, he talks to them, eats very, very little. And then he dies very soon after that. Could he have died from malnutrition? I don't know, possibly. But it seems that he completely separated himself at that point from the world that we know. And to prove that, we know the story of Dr. Carey when he came to him, his doctor, a few hours before that. He said the Sheikh refused treatment in the sense that he said, "Today I will meet my Lord," and he died that same day. This is the state of some of these people. Some people are of that state. For medicine, for instance, we know the story of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who's dying, and Sayyidina Uthman comes to him, and he is unwell, and so he says to him, should I not get you a doctor? Should I not get somebody that can give you treatment? And he says, Amradani tabib, the doctor gave me, or the one that cures gave me the illness, meaning God is the one who gave me the illness, and you want to get me somebody that can cure me. And then he said, should I not leave some money, give some money, set some money aside for your daughters if you pass away? He said, Taraktu lahunna surat al-Waqi'ah. He said, I've left surat al-Waqi'ah for them. So you do see some precedents for this type of, but it's not the fact that they're starving themselves to, in the previous story, to reach a state, rather in state of Sheikh Allawi and other people, it seems that they reach this state of spirituality where often they completely disconnect from many, many things. And their only interest remains in God. Ibn Ajiba states that satiety, or filling one's stomach, has several pitfalls and ill effects, and its ill effects are severe. One, it diminishes intellect, it hardens the heart, it increases desire for sleep, it corrupts the humors, meaning the temperaments, and brings on intractable illnesses. With the last one, we know now for a fact, all the recent studies some of the recent studies on cancer as well, only until 24 months ago, did the journal begin to confidently publish the fact that there is a relationship between cancer and diet. Prior to that, they said that we only had anecdotal, not actual empirical evidence or testable evidence. Now they're saying diet does play a major part, which people of natural medicine have been saying for many, many years. But when we go to the doctors, often they give us medicines, but there's no discussion on diet. All they say is eat less. And this is a catastrophe in the West now, that they've stopped kind of involving diet to a serious level, I'm talking about, or using diet as a method of cure. Which is very unfortunate. He said, through satiety, Satan is able to make headway against man and strengthens his authority over him. Satiety causes one to be lethargic and lazy, inclined to acts of goodness, disinclined to acts of goodness and disobedience. It mentions the story of Sulayna Luqman. So the Luqman, the Quran is an unknown figure. Nobody really knows who he is. There's some inference that was he Aesop, like the book Aesop's Fables, was it him? Allah knows best. So nobody really knows who Luqman was. And he said to his son, he's always advising his son, is it possible that Luqman was Confucius? It's an idea. I mean, Confucius seems to have existed, lived 400 years before Christ. So he was from Ahlul Fatra. He was not from those who a prophet was sent to. And if you read his Analects and try to study him, which I did some time ago, it seems quite clearly that he's a monotheist. Not much is known beyond that. He said, I have come to, or I preach two things. He said the true reality, which may have been God if this is to be believed. And he said good character, which were the two central kind of arkan or pillars of his preaching. So Luqman says to his son, when the stomach is full, the intellect sleeps, wisdom is silenced, and members of the body are too slothful to perform worship. There's a hadith from, now what about the certain hadith where the Prophet would go, alayhi salatu wasalam, and he would eat at people's houses? Would he not eat to a level that he was satiated? What did the Messenger of God do, alayhi salatu wasalam? For instance, there is a hadith, and it's in Bukhari's collection, that states, by Allah, I cannot find any more to drink, the Prophet says. So how does that fit into the whole narrative of eating? And the Prophet is clearly rarely ate. We know that he didn't eat much at all. He spent long periods fasting as well. And so what about these types of narrations about Allah, I cannot find any more? Firstly, that statement is relative. Relative to his form of what satiety means. What satiety means to us, filling our stomach, we know we can't breathe. For asthmatics, double trouble. For people with asthma, but we know what it means to not to eat to our full. But when the Prophet says something of that kind, it means that he's just maybe had more than he normally has, which is very little. That's number one. Number two, it's also related that when you're invited to somebody's house, that the same rules don't apply as to that would normally apply when you're eating yourself at home, or because you don't want to disrespect the host as well. Obviously, if you go to somebody's house and try to practice your spirituality, you shouldn't do that. Or you are at a wedding and everybody's eating around you, and you've taken it depends what type of wedding you're at, but if it's a Syrian wedding, you won't get much food. In Syria, I remember they don't give food out at the weddings. But if it's at an Asian wedding, then if you take only a little bit of food, such that, not even a starter, something, and say to everybody, that's all I eat, that's arrogance. So to respect the host, you'll eat as the host would want you to eat. That's an adab of being hosted by somebody. But the Prophet ﷺ constantly preached through his life about not eating too much. The famous hadith we quoted before in the previous weeks. Say that Aisha said something very important. She said, radiyallahu anha, that the first innovation, bid'ah, that was inaugurated after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ was people eating to their fill. Meaning in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, people wouldn't do that. It was the first bid'ah or innovation, which is really interesting, that it means that it was understood that the believers were people who probably didn't eat too much. It was understood. And she saw it that way. If she's saying the first bid'ah, it means that it was part and understood as being part of the religion. Someone said to Sayyidina Yusuf, do you endure hunger even though you are in charge over the treasure stores of the earth? He replied, I fear lest I eat to satiety and forget the hungry as a result. So it's always, we know in Ramadan, that the truth of that statement. So it will be our biggest challenge now, especially living in the West. Food is one of the biggest challenges simply because it's so readily available. We have definitely 100%, we have neglected the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. We've left it actually. The sunnah of fasting outside of Ramadan has been by and large been ignored and left. Um, uh, on the Monday, on the Thursday, 3 days a month. More than that, even fasting one day, leaving one day, fasting one day, leaving one day has been completely left, number one. Number two, fasting in relation to spirituality has been forgotten. Spirituality now has become merely what clothes you wear and what gatherings you go to, and boasting about if you know your teacher, your sheikh, or what order you're from, which is problematic to begin with. But all this boasting and fasting and these types of things, reading the book of Allah, have completely been forgotten. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith about the Day of Judgment said, the Day of Judgment will not come until spirituality becomes a tale or riwayah, a story that people tell. It won't be practiced. The next line, Imam Busiri states, وَاسْتَفْرِغِ الدَّمْعَ مِنْ عَيْنٍ قَدْ امْتَلَأَتْ مِنَ الْمَحَارِمِ وَالْزَمْ حِمْيَةَ النَّدِمِ. That he states, dry the tears from eyes that have had their fill of forbidden things, and henceforth let only diet be regret. Meaning, dry the tears from the eyes, meaning weep. Dry your eyes from tears, all the tears you have, let them out. Let them all out. Min aynin qad imtala'at. He says, min aynin qad imtala'at. From an eye that's been filled up, mala'a, been filled up, meaning what? That the eyes that have been filled with haram, seeing haram, why don't you now wash those eyes with tears or fill them up with tears? And maintain, and henceforth let only diet be regret. And henceforth let only regret be your diet. Yeah, you can, meaning now maintain your himya. Himya in Arabic now is used, the word used for diet. Let your himya be, your diet be regret and nadam. We know the Prophet ﷺ said, Inna nadama tawbah, or Inna nadama tawbah, that nadama, regret, is indeed repentance. And crying in a personal setting is supposed to soften the heart. We talked about these kind of public crying sessions, how they're possibly madhmoom, they're not good, that's not a good thing. But generally crying is a good thing, especially in relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the next line, the Shaykh says, وَخَالِفِ النَّفْسَ وَالشَّيْطَانَ وَعْصِيهِمَا وَإِنْهُمَا مَحَضَاقَ النُّصْحَ فَتَهِمِ. Oppose the self and shaitan, the devil, and defy them. If they try to offer you advice, treat it with suspicion. Now, this is a really interesting line because he dichotomizes this idea of harm into the nafs and shaitan. So he means the lower self, and nafs amara bisu, meaning khalifin nafsa. We talked about plenty of that, going against the nafs. Was shaitan. Now shaitan's obviously an interesting character, and it's good to probably look at him. So in this regard anyway. Now, is the devil a person? Firstly, that's the question. Is the devil a concept, an idea, or is he a person? Well, the devil is a person. It seems quite clear he's a person, because the story of the devil in the Quran is categorically and clearly in person form. That the devil communicates, he talks, he does things, he speaks to God, God informs him. So it's clearly a person. He's not an idea. Some people now have taken the devil to be this abstract idea. That's a trick of the devil itself, to think that the devil just means bad things or bad energy, or just that's what it means. It's not a person that's actually trying to, an entity that's trying to misguide you. And our tradition has never disagreed on this principle or this point. As for Satan, his enmity towards you is long-standing. Allah said, verily, Satan is an enemy to you, so take him as an enemy. Furthermore, when they say that Satan, and Ibn Ajib does mention this, that Satan flows through the veins of man like his blood, it doesn't mean Satan's inside of you. This idea that, because if that were the case, that Satan isn't inside of you, he doesn't control your actions. How do we know that? In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in one verse states the following, that Allah calls the Satan on the Day of Judgment, and he stands in front of man, and man blames, of course, Satan, and says, Ya Allah, he is the one who made me do it. So the devil replies, this is a verse of Allah in the Quran, and Allah, he says to mankind that, he says, what are you talking about? He says, I had no sultana over you. I have no sultan, I had no power over you. He said, I promised you, and God gave you promises. I made promises to you, and God made promises to you. And you disobeyed God, and you followed me. He says, La talumuni, lumu anfusakum. He said, don't blame me, blame yourselves. This is an evidence to prove the fact that the devil has no power over choice. He only has influence over choice, i.e. the devil can't force you to do anything. Also infers that there's nothing of that kind that can take possession of your body and make you do evil deeds. If somebody goes and commits zina, for instance, they can't say, oh, you know what it was? They commit adultery and they're caught, and they, the whole family are summoned, and the wife says, why did you commit adultery? And he says, you know what it is? You know that jinn problem I've been having, it's the jinn possessed me, and it was an adulterous jinn, and it made me commit adultery. Now that wouldn't wash with anybody, I mean. So, and the Quran clearly states it. And this verse about the devil not having power over mankind, it's not one verse in the Quran. There are a number of verses, I think 4 or 5 verses like that in the Quran, that he says exactly the same thing. I have no power over mankind. In another verse, he says, I will sit on this path and wait for your followers to come, and I will misguide them. He doesn't take possession of your body or your choices. We're to blame for them on the Day of Judgment. Where to blame for them on the Day of Judgment. Shaykh Ahmad Alawi mentioned something very interesting as well in Qawl al-Manqul, that interestingly on the Day of Judgment he talks about, why are people punished? Why doesn't God just forgive them? After saying God does forgive people, he mentions a point about punishment. He says something incredibly interesting. He says that we know in this world that if we commit certain sins, that what we're doing is essentially breaking a law, a had. The nafs knows that. On the Day of Judgment, God doesn't say to people, oh, now because you did this, therefore you're going to be punished. He says that's not what happens. What happens merely is that their book is read to them, and they acknowledge that sin they committed, and they acknowledge that they knew exactly the repercussions for that sin. So what happens now is that repercussion plays out now. That ramification plays out. That it's actually the nafs taking into account the nafs now. It's just the moment of truth has occurred. It's like committing a crime and being arrested for it. That you knew what you were doing and you knew the ramifications of that crime. Now the nafs has accepted it. It may not like it, but it's accepted the fact that it was my own fault, and now I have to do that particular time, or that particular punishment is wajib. So it's a nafs making hisab of the nafs almost on that, at that point. And it's been avoiding that. And that's a very good explanation about the Day of Judgment and people being taken to task. One story that he mentions is, and it's a hadith written by Imam Muslim, that the Prophet ﷺ said that when the son of Adam prostrates, Satan withdraws and weeps, saying, woe to me, the son of Adam was commanded to prostrate and he prostrated. So for him is paradise. But when I was commanded to prostrate, I refused. So for me is a hellfire. Okay. So that is kind of the state that the devil's in. And very interestingly, the devil has hasad. He's jealous of the ummah of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And why is he jealous? Because why wouldn't he be? He's a person who regrets what he did, but to a degree, but it's not enough regret to make him change his way. So he wants to destroy everybody that didn't follow his path. Meaning it's like when people do bad things and sin, the worst of people are the ones that don't want good for others. They don't want others to be pious, but rather, and this is directly an act of the devil almost, that just because they haven't reached a particular state of affairs, they don't want anybody else to have that also. There's a topic that Ibn Ajiba, which I really like to introduce it. He says, why is it that when we read adhan, that the devil runs away, but when we pray salah, comes back? Which is a really interesting point. That why is it that shouldn't he run away when we're praying salah? Why is it that when we call the call to pray? Ibn Ajiba gives two answers for this. The first answer that he gives is very interesting. That he writes that the devil runs away when he hears the adhan, because on the day of judgment, the devil will be summoned to testify on the day of judgment. And he'll also be summoned to testify on the behalf of others, like the verse that I read previously. That this person, he heard the adhan. He heard the adhan and he repeated it. So when the adhan is read, we repeat it. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. We repeat all the statements except for Hayya ala salah, hayya ala falah, we say la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So what he doesn't want to do is on the day of judgment, he doesn't want to testify for the good deeds of any of God's servants. So he doesn't want to go on the day of judgment and say, yes, I did hear him do that, because that would be testification to, he would be testifying to people repeating the adhan, which is a good deed. And he hates us so much that he doesn't want any good to come from that. So out of jealousy and hasad, he doesn't want to testify that we did anything good. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason that he runs away is it's out of anger and envy when hearing the call to prayer and the general invitation. So it's out of anger and envy he runs away. So that's the answer that Ibn Ajiba gives for that. Now, Dhunnun al-Masri, rahimullah ta'ala, mentions something very interesting. But before that, Ibn Ajiba writes, and very interesting, of how to get rid of the devil. And he compares the devil to a dog. He says, if you look at a dog and it's running towards you, okay, what do you do? And this obviously for Pakistanis, and our aversion to dogs and crossing the road and things of that kind was some childhood trauma when you were little and your mom would summon and say to you that, you know, if you misbehave, I'm going to get the dog or something to bite you. I don't know, maybe it's that or it's other things, but our aversion complete to dogs in every way and form. What if a dog's running towards you? What do you do? Yeah, two things you can do, or three things. You can stand still. You can stand still. And if it's just playing, it'll run past you. You can run towards the dog. And if it wanted to bite you, it's going to bite you. And you can try to fight it. Or three, you can run. If you've got a good distance on it, it's probably you probably can get away. Now, the second one is really interesting. If a dog's trying to attack you, what you should never do is try to fight the dog. The dog is just more powerful than you in that sense. It's bite anyway, and it will harm you. And he states that it is said that Satan is like a dog. If you try to fight him, he will tear your garments. But if you go to its master, the master will kindly keep him away from you. And that's why we make ta'awudh, we seek refuge with Allah Jalla wa'ala, because Allah is a master of everything. So when we seek refuge with God, the Satan can't do anything. And that this is one of the analogies that the Ibn Ajiba gives that some of the people said that of how to keep the devil away. Dhunnun al-Masri said, if Satan sees you while you cannot see him, know that Allah sees him and you cannot see Allah. So seek Allah's aid against him, as Sidi Ahmad Zarruq had quoted. Now he finishes the section with a discussion on the lower nafs, and he writes that the lower nafs is in fact the soul, the ruh. And a quick mention on this, on is the nafs and ruh. I talked about it before, but I don't know if I talked about it in this way. That is the nafs and the ruh the same thing? Yeah, Kharputi states that The ruh is called the ruh before it connects with the body. Then it's called the nafs. Ibn Ajiba says the lower nafs, the lower self, the nafs meaning the nafs, sorry, is in fact the ruh. They're the same thing. In its genesis, it's called a soul. When it's created, it's called a ruh. The soul is a subtle entity through which life is possible. When the soul inclines towards lower appetites, it's called nafs. This is in line also with Kharputi, actually. It's in line with Kharputi. Kharputi just adds that idea that once it enters the body, it has no choice but to. But I would argue that at a particular age does it incline towards that. And when it is born and develops and acquires blameworthy character traits, it is called a nafs. It may be likened to the water that nourishes a tree. It is originally water. Then it transforms into grapes. And those grapes then transform into wine. And then transform into vinegar and so on. In the next line, Busiri states, Astaghfirullah min qawlin bila amalin laqad nasabtu bihi naslan lidhi uqumi. Probably the best lines of this chapter. This line and the two lines that follow it are connected. So the theme now changes in the chapter. The next three lines, which bring us to the end of the chapter. One of them is this line that Astaghfirullah min qawlin bila amalin laqad nasabtu bihi naslan lidhi uqumi. That's the first line, line number 26. I beg Allah's forgiveness for saying things I do not do, as though I were ascribing progeny to one who was barren. The next line after that, Amartuk al-khayra lakin ma'tamartu bihi. I ordered you to be good, but then you didn't heed my own advice. وَمَسْتَقَمْتُ فَمَا قَوْلِي لَكَسْتَقِمِ. I was not myself upright, so what of my telling you be upright? Then the last line, وَلَا تَزَوَّدْتُ قَبْلَ الْمَوْتِ نَافِلَةً وَلَمْ أُصَلِّ سِوَى فَرْضٍ وَلَمْ أَصُمِ. I have not made much provision of voluntary prayer before death comes to take me, neither have I prayed nor fasted more than was obligatory. Now these three lines are connected as one set, and they come at the end of the chapter and they change the topic a little bit. The first question, and Ibn Maqlash entertains this and really has a good discussion on this, is who's speaking here? I didn't get to complete the first chapter of the Burda, but some of the recordings are online, I think. And if you watch the first Burda session, or maybe the second, I don't know which one, I covered the first line in. There's a whole discussion of why is Busiri using this type of standard or language style, literary poetic style, where jarrad nafs and akhar, that he's talking to somebody else. It's like an alter ego. This is a famous rhetorical device in Arabic where you're asking questions to an invisible or to a second person. So you create another identity and you tukhatibuhu, you speak to it. And we know that from the first line of the Burda, Amin tadakkuri jiranin bidhi salami mazajta dam'an jarami muqlatin bidami. That is it, the remembrance of the neighbors of the salam, that your tears are mixed with blood. Now, who is he talking to? And throughout the chapter, he's talking to somebody else. So you have a sa'il and you have a mas'ul. You have a person who's asking the questions, and you have a person who's being asked the questions. The point is, on these three lines, who is speaking here? Is it the one that's asking the questions, meaning not Busiri himself? Or is it Busiri saying this? Astaghfirullah min qawlin bila amalin. So is it the other nafs that he created? Or is it Busiri himself, the man? That's interesting. So Ibn Maqlash talks about this problem. He has the opinion that it's the questioner that's asking. He says it's the sa'il, not the mas'ul. Very interesting. Because if you the first line of the Burda, because in the first line of the Burda somebody's crying, you assume that person is the one that's in love with the Prophet. That's Busiri. The one asking the question is somebody else. So now that somebody else is this not Busiri saying Astaghfirullah min qawlin bila amalin لَقَدْ نَصَبْتُ بِهِ نَسْلًا لِذِي أُكُمِ. This discussion, by the way, is not entertained by many people. Ibn Maklash, for me now, is reigning supreme in the commentaries of the Burda. He is now the authority for me, the absolute, the Khatim, the authority, Ibn Maklash, because he's incredibly detailed, and he has the commentary I have is like a few thousand pages, but he has a bigger commentary manuscript that's never been this untapped. It'd be good to have a look at that as well. So that's an important question. Now Ibn Ajiba takes the line of piety here and says, actually, he writes that this couplet is the author's way of expressing humility and self-depreciation, which is a standard of the Sufis always, and the people that know that know themselves, and also that Hasanatul Abrari Sayyiatul Muqarrabin, that the good actions of good people are sins for saints. That me and you, when we do something good, we think it's really good, but for saints, sages, godly people, they're seen as sins, maybe. Meaning they're not seen as much. Sayyiatul Muqarrabin. So he takes that line, and I'm going to give his line, and then maybe next week we'll touch on why Maklash said what he did, why I think, and what my understanding of what Maklash said anyway. He writes, what he has said here is not falsehood. For two reasons. The first reason is that he felt that his actions were tainted and not fit for divine acceptance, so he did not rely upon them. The second reason is that with the exception of prophets, it is almost impossible to be completely safe from obeying the dictates of the ego and Satan. So it is as if he was saying, I have enjoined you to oppose the ego and Satan in all that they tell you to do, yet I was unable to comply with the same command. So how can I say oppose the self and Satan and disobey them? So I enjoined you to righteous works, but you forgot myself. I neither acted upon what I enjoined, nor did I abstain from what I have forbidden others to do. So it was only right that I seek forgiveness for this. That's a really interesting point, that it doesn't matter how pious somebody, pious somebody becomes, that they will always feel that they haven't done very well. And they always do feel that they were short on, they could have done more. Now that feeling doesn't mean that is doesn't necessarily mean that one حقيقة في حقيقة أو في حقيقة حاله هو كذلك, that in the reality of one's state that a person is like that. That doesn't mean that at all. Why? How do we know that? Because a person can be very pious but still think that they have not fulfilled God's commandments to perfection. We know that. It could be even that prophets, and not to compare and put them in this bracket in any way or form, that prophets themselves sometimes feel, even though they're perfect and we see that what they do is completely perfect, but in and of themselves they feel that I need to still turn to God and say to God, Astaghfirullah. They have no sin, but yet they may still feel a reason. Others say that when prophets say Astaghfirullah, that it's actually they're asking for forgiveness for the community. But no one can also answer that they are saying that because they, although being completely perfect in the sight of God, however, in the sight of God, they always turn to Him, feeling that they could have done even more. They could have done even more, and that's a feeling within them, although it's not. That's halul lisan, but it's not haqiqatul hal kama nara nahnu. It's not as we see, of course, which is clear. And indicative of that is the story of Moses, for instance. Musa alayhi salam, who wept and said, and the Prophet saw him weeping and saying to Allah, "Oh Allah, you have favored him." Is inconceivable that prophets can feel any form of jealousy, or rather he was seeing the amount of people that the Prophet was taken to heaven, and that he would take less to heaven from Bani Israel. And that's divine providence. So there's no playing that, of course, but that is one. one thing in that regard. But that's just lisanul hal. That's just something that comes. But for us, of course, the affair is completely different. We're actually sinful people, and we have committed sins. And our state is one of reality, if not underplaying reality. He quotes Sayyidina Ali ibn Ajiba. Next week, I will talk a bit more about Ibn Maklash and why he said what he said, Ibn Maklash. And there's a story that Sayyidina Ali, alayhi salam, that believed that seeking forgiveness for the remedy to every stressful matter, even if it's not sin. It's related that a man came to Sayyidina Ali and said, "O leader of the believers, for years now we have been suffering from drought and shortages." Ali replied, "Seek forgiveness and he will remove affliction that is upon you." Shortly thereafter, another man complained to Ali of weakness and poverty, to which Ali radiallahu ta'ala or alayhi salam replied, "Seek Allah's forgiveness." Then came another man who complained to him that he desired children but was infertile. So Ali said to him, alayhi salam, "Seek abundant forgiveness from Allah and He will bless you with many offspring." Then came a man who complained to Ali that his orchard was ruined. So Ali said to him, "Seek forgiveness." So one then said, "Ya Abul Hasan, O son of Hasan, father of Hasan, you enjoined all those men to seek forgiveness despite the fact that their requests were varied." Ali replied, "I enjoined upon them what the Prophet Nuh alayhi salam enjoined upon his people when he said, 'Seek forgiveness from your Lord. Verily, he is oft forgiving.' And Nuh knew that by nothing less than divine revelation." Meaning that seeking forgiveness, and I'll add a little bit more to this line, is the answer to all affairs. Okay, we'll leave it at that inshallah for today. قولوا قولي هذا أستغفر الله ولكم وأتوب إليه. سائر المسلمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.